Good morning and happy Mother's Day. This morning I'm actually going to let you in on a few secrets, not only from our church, but also from other people that I've talked to that have preached Mother's Day messages in the past. And one of the things that you're often not told and you wouldn't know from sitting out there is that this message is a message that many preachers dread preaching. And the reason is because no matter how you preach a Mother's Day message, you're guaranteed to offend someone. Do you focus on just the women who have actually had children? Because if you do that, then you're going to have a situation where women who couldn't have children or haven't had children are going to feel left out. Do you focus on all women, and then sometimes mothers feel left out? And if you do focus on all women, where do you cut it off? Do you cut it off at, 18, 17, 16? Where do you cut it off? As a matter of fact, it was interesting because when we decided that this church should be an elder-led church, we had a very interesting meeting with Randy, me, Gene, and I don't remember if Jose was there or not. But we had an interesting meeting where we were kind of dividing up who was going to preach when. And I remember them asking me, would you preach through, whatever, first 3-4 months or whatever. And I said, sure. And then I looked up at Randy and I said, tell you what, Randy, you've been a pastor before. Why don't I give you Mother's Day message? And I heard something along the lines of, not me, no way. And then Randy, really, it's okay, you can have it. No, that's okay, you can have it. Back and forth. The reason, again, is because you will almost always offend someone when you preach a Mother's Day message. Because of that, this will be one of the more unusual Mother's Day messages you're ever going to hear. One of the things when I listen to Mother's Day messages, they either talk about Lois and Eunice from the New Testament, or the favorite chapter that I usually hear about Mother's Day is Proverbs 31, the virtuous woman. You hear that, I probably in my life heard that at least 30 times preached on Mother's Days by various preachers. Have you ever actually sat back and read Proverbs 31 and seen what it says? I mean, if you ever want to take a chapter and give a woman an inferiority complex, this is the chapter to do it. If you ever want to make a woman feel like she's not living up to the standards that are being set for her, this is the chapter to do it. And one of the reasons is because we don't interpret this chapter properly or the way this chapter was ever written. I mean, when you start reading this thing, we start in verse 10, it says, "Who can find a virtuous woman, for her price is far above rubies?" Okay. "The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil." So her husband trusts her. Okay, well that's not too bad to start with. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. Well, that sounds good, but on the other hand, some husbands are not the easiest husbands to constantly be good to, but okay, so she's going to do good for the husband. Then it says in verse 13, "She seeketh wool and flax and worketh willingly with her hands." So she's going to go out and she's going to get the materials to weave things, and she's a hard worker. "She is like the merchant ships, bringing her food from afar." So she's going to travel around the village to get her food, as well as being a hard worker, gathering all the things. "She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens." So she not only feeds everybody and makes all the food, but she gets up early in the morning while it's still dark outside to do this. Okay, well, she's probably got plenty of extra time anyway, because she's only gathering things and gathering food. "She considereth a field and buyeth it." So she's a business manager. "And with the fruit of her hand she planteth a vineyard." Oh, goody, now she's a farmer too. I guess she does that when she's not doing her business manager jobs and feeding everyone. "She girdeth her loins with strength, and strengtheneth her arms." Well, it says she's strong physically. I don't think she'd have to work out if she's already a farmer. "She perceives that her merchandise is good, her candle goeth not out by night." So she stays up all night working, but then also gets up while it's still dark in the morning to start working again. Evidently she doesn't believe in sleep, or not much of it. "She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff." So she actually makes the material to make the clothing with. Sounds like a tough job if you're also a farmer and a business manager. "She stretches out her hand to the poor, yea, she reaches forth her hands to the needy." So she also takes care of the needy and supports others. "She's not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet." Scarlet would have been the fine clothing of that day. So she's not only making clothing, she's making the best of clothing for her kids and her family. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Now, if you know anything about purple clothing in the old days, purple was the royal type of clothing that only was the very, very best. So she's making silk, and she's making, not only if you're going to make purple, the reason it was tough to do is it was tough to get all the stuff to dye it with. So she's going to have to go out and gather the right berries to make purple clothing. Her husband is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land. So she makes her husband's reputation as well. She maketh fine linen and sells it. Oh, another business. She's also got a linen selling company, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. I suppose you'd have time to set up a few more companies after all if you're only farming and business manager. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. So she's not only doing all these jobs, but she's happy about it. I don't think I would be happy. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and her tongue is the law of kindness. So she's wise and she's kind. Okay, well that we can understand. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. The bread of idleness? Are you kidding me? When's she going to have time to be idle with all the things she's doing, and she's not bothering to sleep? If you're starting to feel like this is more of a Mother's Day put down than a Mother's Day pickup in this chapter, you might feel that way if you interpret it improperly. Her children arise up and call her blessed. Her husband also praises her. He certainly should praise her if she acts like that. Many daughters have done virtually, but thou excellest all of them. So she's the best of all the women. Favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. The reason I went through that chapter is there is no possible way that any woman could live up to that, or any man for that matter. It would absolutely kill a person to try to live up to that. And the reason I want to bring that out is because, I don't know if you remember this or not, but what I've said before is the two most dangerous places in the entire Bible to take doctrine are the Sermon on the Mount and Proverbs. The Sermon on the Mount, because it's a capsule summary and never intended to be detailed doctrine, and a lot of times we grab a verse out, and that verse we say, aha, we got the meaning, and we don't. And Proverbs, because what's happening in Proverbs is sometimes, well, there's two problems with Proverbs. The first is that we assume that Proverbs, since it's in the Bible, every proverb must be absolutely true. And they are true. But the problem is that we don't interpret them as they were written. If I said we had an English proverb, let's say I said to you, a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush, meaning that if you got something that's locked down, it's better than having a couple of possible things. I know in business, for example, normally you'd rather have one contract that's under contract than to have two, maybe these jobs will come through. But does that mean that's always true? No, I've got really, really good clients, and if they say a job's coming up, I'd rather have two potential jobs in some cases because I know they're going to come through. So a proverb is something that is generally true, but not always true. It's words of wisdom. Same was true in the Hebrew Bible. A proverb was the same thing. It wasn't intended to be always true. If you look at Proverbs 22:6, I've heard this, I can't tell you how many times from parents that were in tears almost. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. And how many parents have you heard come to you, even, I know it's happened with me, saying, what have I done wrong? My kid is bad, I must have done something wrong, because the Bible says if I trained him up right, he'd be doing fine. You know something? I've known some parents, and I've looked them in the eyes and said, you know something? You've been one of the best parents I can imagine. Your kid's still bad. It's got nothing to do with you. And the reason is because Proverbs are generally true. They're words of wisdom. If you raise up a kid right, the odds are much better that that kid's going to turn out right. By the same token, it's not an ironclad guarantee because it was never meant to be that way. If we look at Proverbs 13:8, it says, poverty and shame will come to him who neglects discipline, but he who regards reproof will be honored. So everybody that neglects discipline is going to be in poverty, right? How come you got drug dealers driving Mercedes and BMWs? They're not shining examples of what things should be. The fact is, in general, if you don't listen to things, and if you just want to do your own way, you are going to be in poverty. But there are some exceptions to that. It doesn't mean that every single time that's going to happen. If you look at Proverbs 13:24, he who spares his rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. I can tell you personally, I was the type of child that if my dad came to me and reasoned with me, I would feel so bad about what I had done that I would say, you know something, you're right, I'll change my ways. And that was the most effective way to discipline me. I was maybe a little unusual. But had he, every time something happened, taken out something and beat me with it or something, it would not have been as effective in raising me. Again, the proverb is generally true and good words of wisdom. But when we try to take and say every proverb must be applicable to every single situation, we're taking the verses out of context. That's what we're doing here in Proverbs 31. And the other reason Proverbs 31 we have to look at is, in some cases the Proverbs are talking about ideals. They're not talking about the reality. And this is a case where this is saying the absolute perfect ideal woman would do these things. Obviously no woman could do all of these things. But it's an ideal that's being set up to say, this is a wonderful thing. But when we start taking a look at that and start saying, you have to live up to that standard, that's different. I don't think we have the right to tell every woman in the room, you need to live up to the standard of Proverbs 31. It was never intended to be a lecture to women. Yet a lot of times that's what Mother's Day messages end up being, is a lecture to tell women why they're not good enough, because they're not doing all these things that they should be doing. Now, looking at that, I think we need to ask, what does God really expect of a woman or a mother when it comes to what they're supposed to be doing? The first thing is, if we look in 2 Timothy 1:5, it says, "For I am mindful of the sincere faith within you," talking to Timothy, Paul was, "which first dwelt in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and I am sure that it is in you as well." If you want to be a good mother, pass down the faith of God to your children. And that can apply to any woman also, to pass down the faith of God. Let me ask you a question, and I've seen this many, many times. In this room, put your hand up if your mother directly or indirectly had something to do with you coming to Christ. A lot of hands going up. A lot of people can come to Christ if they have a faithful mother who will share the gospel with it. And not only that, who will live the gospel with that child. To be a great mother, share Jesus Christ with your children. That's the best thing you could possibly do for your children. It's not, if you want to set up a business, great. I got no problems with that. But sharing Christ with your child is going to last for eternity. A business is only going to last so long. If we also look at Titus chapter 2, verses 3 through 5, we're going to go through this a little bit. Titus chapter 2, 3 through 5 starts off with, "Older women likewise are to be reverent in their behavior, not malicious gossips, nor enslaved to good wine or much wine, teaching what is good." The first thing it's talking about here with the women is that it says, don't be slanderers. A couple of negatives here to start with, but then it gets into positives. What's interesting is when it says don't be slanderers, the word for slanderers is actually diabolos. Diabolos you may recognize. It's the word we get devil from. And the reason is because the devil is the slanderer of Christians. So it's saying don't act like the devil does and slander people. Okay. Number 2, it says to not be enslaved to much wine. One interesting thing here is we've talked about wine before, and one of the things with wine is that the Bible actually does not condemn the drinking of wine, it condemns excessive drinking of wine. Now again, be careful, you don't go drinking wine in front of someone who that's going to cause them to stumble either. But the reason this is interesting, it says not enslaved to much wine. That word is actually the same root word that we use, that the Greek uses for the word for slave or servant. So it's saying don't be ensnared by it, don't be trapped by it. But here's where it starts turning around and saying what the women should be doing. It says teaching what is good. Now here's I find a couple of fascinating things. This word teaching is actually kalodidaskalos. That may not mean much to you, but it's 2 Greek words that are combined into one Greek word. Kalo, or comes from the word kalos, which is actually the word for good. The second word is didaskalos. Didaskalos is the Greek word for teacher. So we actually have a passage here specifically talking about women teaching in this case. Now, it may not mean standing up behind a pulpit, but it certainly means passing down the knowledge to their children and to other women. And frankly, also, I don't believe, some people do, I don't believe there's any prohibition of women teaching in the Bible. I believe the only prohibition I can find in the Bible is women elders. But I don't find a problem with women teaching. But certainly in this case, this is a passage which specifically talks about the teaching of women, teaching good and passing this down. So obviously there's a teaching function that women have. And what it says, if you continue that sentence, is teaching what is good, that they may encourage the young women to love their husbands. That sounds kind of strange on the surface of it, that you have to be taught to love your husband. Well, it sounds strange until you wake up and find that your husband's dirty clothing's laying in the middle of the hall. Or that you find your husband can't make up the bed. I can say personally, I hate to admit this, but if Judgment Day comes and I stand before Christ and he stands there and he says, "You're saved, but I got one more test. Make up this bed and do it right." I'm sorry, but I'm not getting in. I can try all day long. I'm not even going to bother trying. There is no way. There is a genetic dysfunction in me that will not let me make up a bed properly. I don't know what it is. It's not that I don't try. She can verify that. I mean, it looks like, when I finish making up a bed, it looks like a bear just got out of it or something like that. I don't know what it is. But husbands are not always lovable. And the reason I bring this up is when it says women teach the younger women to love their husbands, there's a reason for this. Because most people, when we think of love as, oh, it's that sweet feeling, and I look across the room and wow, she's wonderful. That's not love. That is a feeling that comes along with love at times. Love is a choice, and love is action. Once you commit to your mate, it's a choice to love them every day. Because if you've been married long enough, you understand this. If you're young, you may be sitting there saying, "I don't get this." That's okay. But if you've been married long enough, you know there's going to come a day when you look over and you say, "What was he thinking?" And it'll happen. And that's the days when you have to make a choice to love someone. And a lot of times we forget that when God says God loves the world, it doesn't mean that God got this gushy, squishy feeling inside of him and everything was all hunky-dory. It means that God made a choice to send his son to die for us, and through his action made a choice to love the world. When he loves his children, it's by choice. He chose us. So a lot of times we get confused when it encourages the older women to teach the younger women to love their husbands. There's a reason for that. Not only that, if you ever get in a situation, and it happens even in churches, if you get in a situation and you're a woman and you have a situation where you're just fed up with your marriage, come find an older, mature woman in the church who can talk to you. A lot of times the older women are a lot of times the ones that have the wisdom. It takes time to build up wisdom. Wisdom isn't something that you just get overnight. It didn't work, but anyway, you don't pray and all of a sudden God does a wisdom dump inside of you. Knowledge is things that we learn. Wisdom is being able to apply that knowledge. And it takes years to do that. Personally, when I was 30, I thought I was wise. At 54, I look back and think I was stupid at 30. Because wisdom takes time. And you don't understand that, and I'm sure when I'm 70, I'll feel different again. But the point is, a lot of times it's the older women that have the wisdom that can help guide the younger women. We need the older women in the church. And I don't just mean by older, I don't just mean the very oldest. What I'm saying is the women that are getting into their 40s, 50s, 60s, etc., those are the women that have been through things and have the maturity to be able to help the younger women. And not only the younger women, but younger guys as well that have questions. It also says here to encourage, to teach them to love their children. Has any woman, you don't have to raise your hand, has any woman in here actually gotten to the point where you thought, that kid's not the best kid in the world today? There are times when it's hard to love your kids, even though it's a natural thing. When a kid's born and you hold them in your arms, loving's not hard. When a kid goes out and decides at 3 years old that he's going to take a big tray and please his mother by picking all of her tomatoes at once and bringing them inside, like I did when I was 3. And then the mother looks at the tray of tomatoes and thinks to herself, what am I going to do with a giant tray of green tomatoes? That's when she showed me love. By the way, also, the other thing that I probably was not terribly lovable with was when I decided with my friends and my dad, who later admitted it, we had a wiffle ball game out front, which we frequently had done. And my mother for years had been growing a yucca plant. And finally, after years, this thing, if you've ever seen a yucca, it's got these sticky things coming out of it, but then it's got this one stalk that comes up, this giant stalk, and when it blooms, it's incredible. It's got this white flowers all over the place. If you've ever seen one, you know what I mean. Well, after playing wiffle ball and after taking a swing out front in the front yard, you would have been amazed to see my mom's face when she came out and found her prize yucca plant with a giant stalk with masking tape around the middle of it, taping the top half onto the bottom half. She still loved me, even though I did that. The point is, it's not always easy to love your children. Sometimes children do things that make them very unlovable. And those are the times when it's the older women being told to teach the younger women not just to love their children, but how to love their children, how to show their children love. It also says that the women are to be sensible, pure workers at home, kind. Let me stop there and we'll go on in a minute. For the sensible and pure portion, I think those things are obvious. You can figure out what they mean. It says working in the home, very similar to a housewife. And I think here you have to remember in the context, there was really no such thing as a woman who went out and set off in the business world in Roman times. So I do not believe this is in any way a restriction saying that women can't be businesswomen or anything else. I think instead of that, what this is saying is that if you are working in your home, do good work in your home. Show the people in your home that you love them. It's funny, I think sometimes also that comes much more natural to women than it does to men. And as a man, I can say that. It also says, subject to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be dishonored. I'm not going to solve today what this means exactly with subject to their own husbands, but I will say a couple of things. Number one, it says own husbands. This is not women are subject to men in general. That just doesn't exist in the Bible at all. Secondly, this is only talking to the women right here. If they were talking to the men would have had instructions on how to treat their wives as well. A lot of times it's very easy for us to take, see, these are things you've got to do, pull it out for the women, without looking at, and these are things you have to do. So I think a lot of times this idea of the subjection is only looking at one side of the coin. And it's much more of a mutual subjection almost within a marriage. Again, I'm not going to get into that too deeply today, but thought I'd mention it. And the key here, though, is that it says, so that the word of God may not be dishonored. Why are the women to do all these things? It's simple. The reason is so that God himself will be honored. One of the things we forget about, I've used the book of Ephesians as an example many times. The book of Ephesians is frequently seen as first 3 chapters are the set of theology, last 3 chapters are the set of rules. Whereas Ephesians, if you look at it, is actually the entire book is woven through to show how do we honor God through our actions to show that we are no longer acting as Gentiles, or how were the Ephesians to do that? The point being is, we frequently miss the entire point of the book of Ephesians, which is our actions will honor God, and by honoring God through our actions, God will be glorified. I think we have a similar situation here in Titus where Paul's saying to Titus is, when the women act this way, they glorify God. And by glorifying God, they're doing the right thing. Now you could apply this to men too, but today we're talking about the women. But that's the entire purpose, is so that God is glorified and that his word is true. Now the other thing that I haven't really talked about much today so far is, what about women who are women but not mothers? Sometimes they don't want to be mothers. Sometimes it's not by choice. Sometimes it's also because of age. But the point being is, not every woman can be a mother just because she wants to be a mother. First thing I would say to you is to think about this. There is no such thing as a believer in Jesus Christ who is not adopted. Therefore, there is no reason in the world that women who are not mothers shouldn't be giving advice and counsel and friendship and love to other women and other people as well. So when you think about that, as I said, we're all adopted anyway. The other thing I would say in relation to that is it's almost like you may not be an actual mother, but you can be a surrogate mother. Now, one thing that I think about is that when I was in kindergarten, my first 3 years of elementary school were very unusual. I had a wonderful first grade teacher and I had a wretched kindergarten and second grade teacher. My kindergarten teacher was actually a Nazi. Now, you may be saying to yourself, okay, he's exaggerating, right? Nope. She grew up in Nazi Germany. She thought it was wonderful. She thought that the kids should be treated exactly as Hitler has treated the kids. She liked the Hitler Youth. I wish I was exaggerating. I'm not. Her name was Mrs. Kabish. I won't even tell you what that morphed into. But the point is that this woman loved treating kids just like the Nazis did. So one time we had an assignment to make a snowflake. Not hard. You fold the paper in quarters, you cut out the pieces, you open the quarters, you got your snowflake. I did my snowflake. I go up to her. We had to have our snowflakes approved. Take the snowflake up. Nope, that's not a snowflake. I'm thinking, what do you mean it's not a snowflake? Okay. She said I had to go to another snowflake. So I go back, cut out another snowflake. She got mad at me. She said, that's not a snowflake either. That doesn't look good enough. Now, I was 4 years old at the time, okay? I got into kindergarten early. And I'm being told my snowflake isn't good enough. The third snowflake comes back, and she says again, that's not a snowflake. I look at her dead in the eyes and I said to her, how do you know that's not a snowflake? Because you said every snowflake is different. That did not go over real well. I ended up missing recess and having to lay on a mat and watch all the other kids play. To a 4-year-old. I'm sorry, had that been my introduction and the only introduction I had to women, it would not have been a good one. When I got to second grade, I'll skip first grade for a minute. When I got to second grade, have you ever heard the stories about the kids who are right and left-handed and the teacher smacks them with a ruler and forces them to write right-handed? Welcome to the club. I'm the story. Okay? Every time I wrote with my right hand, my second grade teacher, Mrs. Wiley, would come after me and go, whack! I had to write with my left hand, but I had to write with my right hand the entire year. Again, not a good experience. As a matter of fact, I can say for both of them, they got to be over 100 years old each now because they were old when it started. If I ever catch up to them, they're going to be slow. Anyway, we'll finish this thing off. But here's what happened between first and second grade. Between first and second grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Barclay. And Mrs. Barclay could have been the grandmother to every person in the world. I don't know much about her, but she was a wonderful woman who made me feel special every day. And she made every kid in the class feel special. And instead of having 3 years of bad teachers and me having a very negative attitude about teachers, I ended up with a balanced attitude about teachers and actually a good attitude because of one teacher, Mrs. Barclay. Because if it had gone to third or fourth grade and I still hadn't gotten any good teachers, I don't know what I would have felt about teachers. But this one lady was almost like a surrogate mother in how she treated the class. This one lady made everybody in the class feel special. She made up for all the things of kindergarten and she made up for all the things of second grade. Every woman in this room has that ability to make kids feel special or make people feel special. You don't have to be a mother to do that. And I can also tell you this. If you want to know what God expects you to do, honor God. You don't need to be perfect. Simply honor God. And I will say something else. The women in this room, the mothers in this room, you are special. We know that. We're never going to understand you, but we know you're special. Now, one other thing I was going to say is that at this point in time, it's 11:30 right now. This is a deliberately short sermon, and the reason it's a deliberately short sermon is because it's Mother's Day. And many of you want to get to your families, and many of you, not only that, if you want to hit a restaurant or something like that, you know how crowded it's going to be. And I thought, let's give people a little extra time today. Instead of having a long sermon today, we're going to make it a little bit shorter. So happy Mother's Day, and we'll be closing. We also have pamphlets as we leave, and we're going to pray and have a closing song, and then go enjoy your families.